Hello, everybody. Sunday Adelaja here. Okay, I'm continuing the topic that we have been doing for some weeks now, and today's topic is the same general series we are doing. Are Black African people cursed? No, no way. If they have been cursed, they would not have ruled over Europe. But if you don't know that Europe was for about 700 years under the rulership of black people, especially Southern Europe, and So, who are those Africans that ruled over Europe? That is what I want to talk about today. So, please go ahead and share this message. Share. Let's share the messages. You go share the message, and we'll be ready to go. So, the topic of today is Africans who ruled over Europe. So who are they? You know, if you read history books and you do your research about black people who ruled over Europe or who brought civilization to Europe, like my book is called How Africans Brought Civilization to Europe. So who are those black people? You will discover that they are not called Africans because the name Africa just appeared recently after the Europeans, renamed the continent Africa. But besides, there used to be different names that black people used to be called. They used to be called Kush. They used to be called Ethiopians. They used to be called Nubia. They used to be called, all kinds of names. Sumerians, Phoenician, all kind of names that they used to be called. But at this time in history, when the black people came and conquered Europe, they were called Moors, Berbers, and Saracens. So, but when you look at that, because a lot of, especially the Moors, a lot of them were Muslims because they had been conquered. Their country, their land had been taken over by Muslim religion. They themselves were not really conquered, but the Muslim religion had spread to them. So many of them have become Muslim. I'm talking, so if you look at the word Moors, that is the short form of Mauritania. It is still a country that is still in existence today, but only today is much more smaller than when it was before the Europeans cut it into pieces. So before then, it was a big country that comprises of countries like Mali, Guinea, Mauritania, Algeria, Libya, and those kind of places. But it's mainly the Mauritanian and Malians that were called Moors. So, and the same thing, then it goes, you go to other areas like Algeria and other places. So when you see these names, because many of them now had converted to Islam by this time, and they were carrying Muslim names. So unfortunately, in a lot of history, in European history, they are most of the time being referred to by their religion rather than by their nationality. But still, you will find also a lot of places where they are being referred to as Moors or Africans or Ethiopians or blacks or Berbers or Saracens. They are, but most of the time they are referred to as Muslims because that time it was a fight of civilization. Europe was Christian and Muslims were coming from the east, and that is why it was mainly, a lot of people think that Moors are Arabs, but Moors were actually Africans. Okay, so let's go. So who are these people? I'm going to give you more understanding about all of them. Who are the people called Moors? Who are the Berbers? Who are the Saracens? So Africans created the most developed civilization in medieval Europe, because at this time Europe had gone down into the Dark Ages. So the medieval Europe was controlled and ruled over by Africans. We briefly mentioned that already. According to the Oxford Dictionary, black people, and in particular Negroes, were called Moors. Moors. You know, the Negroes, you know, I forgot, that is another name they used to call black people as well, Negroes. But the another name they call them is Moors. So Romans called Northwest, you know, so West Africa where Nigeria is, and North Africa, Mauritania, and all of Africa, the Romans used to call us Moors. Now we will conduct a very deep review of this issue so that once we understood what Moors were, we could appreciate the Moorish Empire that became the cultural center of Europe. So 3 terms were used to refer to Moors. Moors is one, but in the Arab language, because a lot of the Moors that came to conquer Europe came together with their Muslim brothers from the Arab nations. So Arab texts often use the term Berber instead of Moor. So Europeans and Romans called Africans Moor, and Arabs called them Berber, which was the definition of ancient non-Arab nations of Northwest Africa. So there were Arabs who later came to North Africa, like Egypt, Morocco, Algeria, but that was later. So by the time they came, they met people there, and the people they met there were the black people. So they used to call them Berber. So this is helpful for us to know that when we are talking about Moor or Berber conquering Europe and ruling over Europe, we are not talking about Arabs, because even Arabs themselves, they were calling them the name that, it's just like saying, I get to America now, I see Hispanics and I see blacks and I see white Caucasians. So I cannot be a Caucasian and say, okay, I'm a Caucasian, but I'm saying they are Hispanics. There are other people they call Hispanics, there are other people they call blacks. So because it shows that there are different groups of people. So because they were working together, the Arabs, they were calling on the other nationality that was working with them. These are Africans, African Americans. These are blacks. These are Hispanics. So in Europe, despite the fact that there were Arabs there too, because they were Muslims, but they were still calling black people, you know, they were differentiating them, even though they had they have the same religion, but they were still calling them by who they are, by Africans. So they call them Berber, while Europeans call them Moor. So, and that started from the time the Arabs started coming to North America, to North Africa. Christian sources often use a generalized term, Saracen, to refer to Muslims, including Moors. So when the people came to conquer Europe, you know, because the Christian Europe just saw them as, like I said, Muslims more. So they just call all of them Saracen and Moors. So because they are Muslims, Moors, when they say Moors, they are talking more in particular about blacks. But most of the time they call them Saracen, just means like infidels, like these are both Muslims and Muslims, all of them, both Muslim blacks and Muslim brown. But when they want to specifically talk about blacks, they call them Moors. All scholars agree that the term Moor came from the Roman word Mauri, which they used to call black Africans by Roman playwright Plautus. Plautus supported the view that the word Moor was synonymous with the word Negro. To set Moors of the 6th century against another racial group of North Africa, the Byzantine writer Procopius of Caesarea wrote that race was not like black Moors, you see. So these are the Byzantine people. Who are the Byzantine? Byzantine people were the Christians that were living in Turkey that time, before Turkey was taken over also by Muslims. So those Christians, those Romans, they were Romans. They were calling, the way they were differentiating between Moors, the black people, and other Africans who were in North Africa, like the Arabs. So there was differentiating between them, that these Africans, they were not black Moors. You know, they are talking about Africans, but they are not black Moors, because the black ones are the Moors, but these other ones are different Africans. So they are trying to differentiate them. So whenever you see Moor, you will now be able to know that they are talking about black people. Isidore, a Catholic scientist and Archbishop of Seville, wrote that the word Moros meant black. Even today, one can see a black Moor's head adorning the flags of Corsica and Sardinia, pointing to their previous ruler's ethnicity. These are regions in present-day Italy. In classical Russian literature, and also translation of classical foreign literature into Russian made in the 19th and 20th centuries, Negroes were often called Moors in Russian translations of old literatures. The saying, "the Moor has done his job," "the Moor should leave," this is from Shelley's play, Fiesco's Conspiracy at Genoa. That is referring to the domination of the blacks over Europe, that they have done their job, that is, they have conquered the place. Now it's time to leave. Let them go. Let them leave our continents for us. Also interprets the term Moor as the term Negro. Since there are similar proverbs relating to Negroes and no such proverbs relating to Muslims, in Shakespeare's Othello, Black Othello is called a Moor. You see, Othello is there, and they call him a Moor, because that they didn't call him as what they call a serene. He was not called the other word we are using, Saracen. It was not called Saracen, but it was called Moor. So that is how they differentiate. They didn't call him Saracen like all Muslims, either black or Arab, but they called him Moor because he's black. That is to say, he's not the brown North American, Arab Muslim. So Othello is referred to as Moor, because many of the Moors who could not be defeated by the European medieval forces were Muslims. Paintings and literature depicted the tormentors of Christ as black. And the reason they call them blacks, because they came and they conquered Europe, which was Christian. They call them tormentors of Christ, sorry. The reason they call them tormentors of Christ is that they are the ones who would conquer the Christian country. And because they could not be defeated by the Christians, and they were under the domination of Europeans, were under their domination, they were Christians, so they were calling blacks tormentors of Christ. Similarly, the demons were also described as black-faced. That's how black, because to them that is associated with bad news, with oppression, with sorrow, because they were evicted from their land, they were subdued, so they are seeing black people as demons, and that's why they started painting demons as black in Europe. Among other titles, in medieval folklore, Satan was called the Black Knight, you see. So Satan was also depicted as black, black-skinned, or the Black Ethiopian, or the Big Negro. That is how they started calling Satan. But that all started during that time when the Africans conquered Europe. In a cantiga of the Spanish king Alfonso X the Wise, 3 Moors attacking the Chincoy castle are described as black as Satan. In another cantiga, another black man who robbed a church is identified as a Moor. In a poem by Fernan Gonzalez, both demons and Moors are described by the word carbonientos, which means having charred faces. Naturally, at the time, Moors represented the embodiment of evil for European Christians, so they were described in a negative context. For us, it's just important to make sure from different sides that Moors were black. That's the point that I'm making. During the Renaissance in Europe, researchers, writers, and scientists began to apply the term Moor to all black people. In support of this, Richard Hakluyt, one of the most prolific writers of the Elizabethan era, a tireless collector of geographical data, wrote that Africans who in the old days had been called Ethiopians and Negritos in his time were called Moors, Morins, or Negros, you see. In Romanic languages, Spanish, French, Italian, in the Middle Ages, the word Moor was translated as Mauro, or Mori, or Moor. These are all derivatives of this word, can still be found in these languages up to today. And most of the time when you hear, even in English language, you hear people they have a name, the last name, they use it as Moor as last name, or Mure as last name. Whenever you see the people who are bearing Moor or Mure, that means that they had a black connection in their black history. It means, just like even the Queen Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth, who is alive now, was talking about her own ancestors, that she had some Arab Muslim ancestors around that time when they conquered Europe. So the same way, people who are called Mure or Moor, is because they have some connection of the black people in them. In Spanish, for example, black currant is mora. This is black currant. This noun initially referred to a Moorish woman. In Italian, mora also refers to a negro. A Moorish woman and a black currant, and morilla means black olives. A Spanish word for brunette is moreno. A French word, morico, means dark skinned, and morillon means black grapes. So you see, the whole word is the same key word, black. And in the final study of the term Moor, let's take a moment and plunge into the world of knights. Everyone has heard about King Arthur, a legendary leader of Britons of 5th, 6th century who defeated Saxon invaders and is knight of the Round Table. But few people know of a black knight of the Round Table. You see, in that Round Table, if you look at that Round Table, you will discover that there is a black person there, and he was a knight. So people remember King Arthur and his victories and his council, or his knight of the Round Table, but few actually speak about the role of the black man there. Sir Morien was a black, you say Morin, again Morin, that like Morin. So that also talks about his own heritage. So Sir Morien was a black Christian Moor, the son of Angloval, one of the knights of King Arthur's Round Table. In the romance, Morin, which is part of the medieval Dutch version of Lancelot and is located at the Royal Library in Brussels, it is said that Knight Agloval fell in love with a Moorish princess, you see, a black princess, and had a son, Morien, you see. Subsequently, Agloval was forced to leave the land of Moors. The novel, originally called The Moor, says that the whole body of Morien, except the teeth, was black. That's the same way they talk about us today. The whole body was black except the teeth. And that person was knighted and sitting on the Round Table with the king. In a personal fight with Lancelot, they fought for so long that Knight Gawain stopped them to save the lives of both excellent warriors. Morien saved the life of Sir Gawain, third in nobility out of all the knights of the Round Table on a battlefield. When he told Lancelot and Gawain that he was looking for his father, they promised to help him find him, and then they performed heroic deeds together. demonstrating their talents. At the end of the story, Maurien found his father and they returned to the land of Moors, where Agloval married Maurien's mother and became a local king. English Egyptologist Gerard Massey mentions Maurien as the Stone Age builder and ascribes him to a black race of Cushitic builders. Cushite, you remember we'll always be talking about Cushite, Cush, that is the tribe that ruled over Africa, Sudan, Ethiopia. That's one of the earliest names that black people were called. The next term we are going to examine is Berber. Thus, in Arabic literature, the word Moor was practically non-existent, and in return, virtually all inhabitants of the Maghreb, a name given by medieval Arab geographers and historians to African countries located west of Egypt, were called Berbers. You see, this is talking about West Africans, not North Africans, but West Africans. Black people were called Berbers by the Arabs. It is believed that the word Berber came from the Latin barbari, which is equivalent to barbarians, a name Romans used to call nations who spoke neither Latin nor Greek. You see, before, Germans were also called barbarians. English people were called barbarians. All Europeans, apart from who are not Romans, or who are Romans but who are not speaking Latin, they were called barbarians. Berbers emerged as a result of mixing of Europeans who had come to the Maghreb at the end of the second millennium with more ancient Africanoid inhabitants of North Africa. According to Roman documents, amongst Berbers in North Africa, there were black Gaetuli and black Asphadeloids, Berbers of Morocco. So most people started looking like this after some time because they mixed up together with the people who came from Europe, because during the Roman Empire, Europeans moved to North Africa, because it was under the domination of Rome. So they put their soldiers there, their warriors, their rulers, and that's how they mixed with the African people. And a lot of them started, these are apart from the Arabs, so these were before the Arabs came. Sir Harold Alfred Michael, a knight of St. Michael and St. George orders and a distinguished service order, mentioned black Africanoid Tubu and Tuareg peoples that resembled Asian black people of the Sahara, who were originally Lamtar Berbers, you see. So it's the same connection, talking about the people down now, people in Sudan and down there. Arab geographer Ibn Hawal believed that Tuareg, the people of the Berber group, were originally from Sudan, and from the mother side were descendants of black-skinned Ham, the son of Noah. You see, they call it black-skinned Ham, but it's not Ham. They were descendants of Ham, yes, they came from Ham, but they are actually children of Cush. Scholar and historians Wahab ibn Munabi wrote that Berbers belong to black Hamitic races. Arab writer, theologian, pioneer of Arab literary criticism, Al-Jahiz listed Sudanese, Ethiopians, Tanzanians, Berbers, Copts, Nubians, the Zagawa, and Moors as black peoples. Describing Berber women, Muslim scientist Sanhaji wrote that they were black, although there were also some white among them. The third term we need to address is Saracens. The majority of scholars are of the opinion that this word has Afro-Asian origin. The general belief is that Saracens were originally nomadic tribes of the Arabian and the Syrian deserts, formerly known for attacking Roman borders. Historian Jerome, 4th century, identifies Hagarians, Ishmaelites, descendants of Abraham and Egyptian woman Agar with Saracens. He thought that they had decided to change their name to Saracen as they had claimed they were tied with Sarah, the wife of Abraham. German theologian Rabanus Maurus, the author of one of the first medieval encyclopedia titled On the Natures of Things, wrote about similar observations. In his comments to Genesis, he tied Mors by type to the house of Ishmael. It is believed that Ishmael, the son of Abraham, and Egyptian Hagar, a historical descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, was the builder of Kaaba, a Muslim shrine in Mecca. Ishmael became the father of Arabs, one of the Semitic branches from the name of Shem, the son of Noah. The medieval kingdom of Mesopotamia was also called Karasin, and the Byzantine Greeks were known as Saracenos, according to French writer and historian Jean-Paul Clebet. Kara, which means black, linguistically evolved into Saracenos and Saracen. Okay, this is where these all are the areas they were referring to as black. So this Saracen, they are not totally black. They are, mixture. Maybe Arabs mainly, you could say, or Asians. Saracen are described in detail in the Song of Roland, one of the most famous and significant heroic poems of the old French epics. Sir Roland, the prefect of Britain and a warrior in Emperor Charles' army, describes one of the leaders of Saracen as black as molten resin. He calls these 50,000 army Ethiopians because black, wide-nosed Saracen with flat ears came from there. You see, so when they refer to Saracen, they are not just referring to black people, they are referring to all Muslims that came to Europe that time, both the Arabs and the black people. But in this case, you see, he was separating the black army, the 50,000 army of the black people, Ethiopians, were calling them Ethiopians and calling them the black. Ronan later describes Saracen blacker than ink, with no white places except for teeth. Hey, Vikushes. Probably not. La Sicile historique. Okay, these are just some history. Knight Ferragus is described as a black giant Saracen. For the first time, he appears in the Chronicle of Pseudo Turpin, where he fights Roland. In a novel, Roland and Ferragus is described as a Saracen, black as resin. You see, even though they are Saracen, but they still try to separate them, differentiate them from the other people who might not be as dark as black. Another character is Alagofa, an Ethiopian giant whose skin was black and rough. It is written that he was a knight of great power who had no equals in Europe, so strong and high. And these were the drawing of the time. There is also a legendary battle of William of Gelon and Isor, a black Saracen giant. Thus, the image of black Saracen in medieval literature reflects a realistic identification of tall Africans in Saracen armies, in the Arab armies. We have discovered that the term Moors, Berbers, and Saracen define black people, and when studying the Mauritanian Spain, this will be our basis for linking their achievements with black peoples. All right, we'll continue a bit later when we'll be talking more about how blacks rule Europe. Well, let's go ahead and share this message. Share. share the message with your friends and family. Let this information get out. And besides, I want to encourage you to go join our mentorship program, which is on sundayadelajablog.com/mentorship. My books are also on sundayadelajablog.com/books. If you want to come to Ukraine and be with us for the training, History Makers HMT is also there on the same blog, sundayadelajablog.com/HMT. And same with those of you who might want to join us to Nigeria. It's also sundayadelajablog.com/Nigeria. Just go there and fill out the forms. And we'll be showing you a video that will bring some understanding to this class that we are doing. So see you later. Thank you. Peace.
Hello and welcome again to UCL Global Health. We have a very distorted view of Africa. I think many people think that Africa's development has been something that's only occurred in the last century. So it's a great pleasure to welcome Kevin MacDonald, who's Professor of African Archaeology at UCL, and you specialise particularly in West Africa.
That's right.
But this image is completely wrong, because for example, what was West Africa like where you know about, say, 2,000 years ago?
Well, about 2,000 years ago, we already were beginning to have the first urban centres in West Africa.
So towns?
Towns.
So these weren't hunter-gatherer people?
No, these were cities of 10, 20,000 people in the early first millennium AD. And if we go back before that, into an area which is now the Mauritanian desert, there was a state contemporary with Kerma in the Nile Valley over in Sudan, in Mauritania, called Tichit, or at least it's in a region known as Tichit. We're not really sure what it called itself. But there we have a very sophisticated social formation with hundreds of settlements and some things that would certainly be the size of towns by 1200 BC.
Wow. And an alphabet?
No. Literacy for West Africa came with Islam.
Okay. And so that's sort of Sudan's side and Mauritania. What about Nigeria? Would there have been towns in...
Well, in Nigeria you have some of West Africa's earliest art traditions. You have the so-called Nok culture, which is in central Nigeria, around the Jos Plateau area. We have a very sophisticated figurative art tradition, terracotta tradition, by about 800 BC. And this is going hand in hand with early iron metallurgy in that area.
So these civilizations were every bit as sophisticated as anything in Britain?
At that time, yes. And it's one of the great pities. This is sort of something which does not really feature much in European or indeed American secondary school curriculum.
Is there a movement in Africa to rediscover this as an academic discipline, or not sufficiently?
Well, there are probably not sufficient practitioners for the amount of space and the amount of heritage, the amount of archaeology that has to be interfaced with. But at least in most African school systems, aspects of this past are taught. But again, not so much.
So if you come up to the Middle Ages or the pre-industrial era, do you go up, do you study?
I work right up until the 19th century, so yes.
So at that time, before the colonial invasion of Africa, where we think history began, there were sophisticated governance structures, there were towns, there was art, there was ceramics, there was...
technology, outstanding metalworking. Yeah, there was all of that. And I think perhaps the European land grab for Africa in the 19th century came at the wrong time for Africa. A few centuries before, when Africa was at the height of its own internal empires, I would think that at that point any European attempt to control Africa would have been repulsed. So the great colonial scramble for Africa happened at a time where a number of factors, including the Atlantic slave trade and also trans-Saharan interventions, had broken down the older African empires, which more or less extended from Lake Chad to the Senegalese coast, say around 1300 AD or 1400 AD.
So actually this is another reason for Afro-optimism, if you like. I mean, at the moment the economists are all saying that this is the fastest growing region of the world, and there's much more reason to be optimistic about Africa than the press often report. But also from a historical viewpoint, if we can get over the aberrant colonial era, then there's every reason to hope that the structures of governance and civilization will re-emerge.
There's a great deal of sophistication and dignity at the heart of African society, which has a great antiquity. And I think a lot of the stereotypes generated during the colonial era have undermined this. And in a sense, Africa needs to remember itself.
So just tell me a little bit about archaeological methods and the way archaeology has changed, say, in the time you've been doing it, which is about 2 decades.
Well, for one thing, remote sensing is helping us a great deal, satellite imagery and so forth, for mapping out the distribution of settlements, for assisting us in survey, because after all, this is an absolutely vast area. And although we've been working very hard since the 1960s to catalog Africa's heritage, we probably have an idea of probably less than 50% of what's actually out there. There's a small number of African and foreign archaeologists working, and it takes a great deal of time to document all of this. But in terms of changes more broadly within the discipline, African archaeology has moved progressively from being more prehistoric in terms of the demography of its practitioners to working more and more on historic periods and occupying terrain which has been emptied by a shrinkage in pre-colonial African history as a discipline, and for that matter in historical anthropology. So archaeologists have had to become their own historians, their own anthropologists, and we're progressively working on more recent periods, what might be considered African historical archaeologies, the past, say, 500 years.
So you've moved into the space that used to be filled by historians?
That's right, and we're doing the same sort of work. We're doing work.
Are you competing, or is it that the historians aren't doing it?
There are only a few left in the UK, so we are the place where one would come to study pre-colonial African history now, I would think, in terms of there's the group of permanently employed African archaeologists in the UK. Most of us are what might be termed historical archaeologists here at UCL and other universities, and we do the same sort of work that historians had previously been doing, including collecting oral histories, being more deeply embedded in local communities, and also being led to an extent by community concerns.
But my final question, this raises some really interesting issues, because everyone says you should always learn from history, and if archaeologists have moved into the void that used to be occupied by history, we've got to learn from you guys. What do you think we've got to learn in development and the kind of attitudes that we have towards Africa and towards development? What can we learn from archaeology? Are we making some huge mistakes?
Yes, I mean, there are some gaffes which have been committed by European politicians, by UN officials who have a fundamental misunderstanding of the African past. Famously, Nicolas Sarkozy came to Senegal a few years ago and talked about Africa as being this timeless, undeveloped place, which is a complete nonsense. So there is a great deal to be done in terms of educating ourselves about Africa so that we have a better understanding of its past. But also, within development, it's important to realize that heritage is part of development. This is a battle that Africanists have been fighting over the past couple of decades, to have archaeology and history considered part of the development process, both for reasons of national dignity and unity, but also as a means of developing tourism, rather than this sort of Africa as safari park, Lion King sort of idea of Africa, where you have, most cultures of the world, for example, Disney has had some sort of play or movie featuring human beings. Africa is unique that it was treated with animals, which says something, I think, about the wrong end of the stick, which has been grasped.
So we've completely written their culture out, basically, from our development speak, from our history books, and also from the way we encourage people
The
to
history,
visit.
the political sophistication, the artistic sophistication, the technological sophistication. We need to re-educate ourselves. We need to re-educate Europe and the broader world about Africa.
And finally, on a global health, I mean, there's nothing more important for well-being as to have a sense of pride and in your own heritage and your own past. So it's
Absolutely, it's part of human dignity, and I think that the more that this is taken on board, both inside and outside of Africa, the better it will be for us all.
Kevin, thank you very much.
Thanks.